In a brand new court filing, special counsel Jack Smith is asking Judge Tanya Chutkan to issue a narrow gag order against Trump, specifically regarding what he can publicly say about potential witnesses, arguing that his statements could present a serious and substantial danger of prejudicing his election interference case. The government writes that Trump, quote, made clear his intent to issue public attacks related to this case when, the day after his arraignment, he posted a threatening message on Truth Social, which stated, "If you go after me, I'm coming after you." Trump, they write, has made good on his threat. Since the indictment in this case, the defendant has spread disparaging and inflammatory public posts on Truth Social on a near daily basis regarding the citizens of the District of Columbia, the court, prosecutors, and prospective witnesses, like his previous public disinformation campaign. Regarding the 2020 presidential election, the defendant's recent extrajudicial statements are intended to undermine public confidence in an institution, the judicial system, and to undermine confidence in and intimidate individuals, the court, the jury pool, witnesses, and prosecutors. The motion goes on to highlight several screenshots of posts on Trump's Truth Social account, attacking Jack Smith, Judge Chutkan, the Justice Department, and his former VP, Mike Pence. It also lays out various examples of individuals who've been threatened and harassed after being publicly attacked by Trump. The names of those individuals are redacted, but our reporters have gleaned that former CISA Director Chris Krebs and Georgia election workers Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss are among those cited. Joining me now is Harry Litman, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General and former U.S. Attorney, Charles Coleman Jr., former Brooklyn prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst, and Lisa Rubin, MSNBC legal analyst. And I am going to start with you, Lisa, because you've been pouring through this filing. So give us the highlights. I've been reading through it as well, but I would like to hear your legal eagle read on what we're reading, what this filing entails.
Joy, there are two things I think our viewers should know. One is the characterization of this as a gag order is, I think, a little overwrought, because what the Department of Justice and specifically the special counsel is trying to do here is get the judge to impose a narrowly tailored order that would restrict only certain types of judicial statements, and in particular, extrajudicial statements, meaning out-of-court statements, and in particular, statements, and I'm reading from the brief right now, regarding the identity, testimony, or credibility of prospective witnesses, and statements about any party, witness, attorney, court personnel, or potential jurors that are disparaging and inflammatory or intimidating. And so you have this reaction already from the far right on Twitter saying, of course they're trying to gag him. They can't gag all of us, or that's the only way they're going to win this case. The opposite is true. Jack Smith has a very strong case against Donald Trump, and all they want to do is try it fairly. If anything, they are trying to ensure an atmosphere of fairness that Donald Trump himself does not want.
And, you know, Charles, we have a history here. This is some of the examples of misleading and inflammatory statements that Trump knew or should have known would cause others to harass and harm people. This is from the filing as well. Targeted an individual on Twitter because he had publicly stated there was no evidence of election fraud. That resulted in threats against the targeted individual and his family. Publicly derogated an individual for certifying the election, resulting in an individual's family getting threats of violence. Issued public posts about an individual for certifying the election, resulting in individuals receiving threats and threatening communications. Targeting an individual on Twitter for rejecting one of the defendant's election challenges, resulting in individuals requiring additional police protection. And let me just play for a minute what happened when Donald Trump on January 6th tweeted Mike Pence didn't have the courage to essentially steal the election and break the law. Take a look.
Here's what the president wrote in his 2:24 p.m. tweet while the violence at the Capitol was going on. And here is what the rioters thought.
Nothing but a traitor, and he deserves to burn with the rest of them.
So this all escalated after Pence. What happened to Pence? Pence didn't do what we wanted.
Pence voted against Trump.
Okay, and that's when all this started?
Yep, that's when we marched on the Capitol. We've been shot at with rubber bullets, tear gas.
We just heard that Mike Pence is not going to reject any fraudulent elector vote.
Charles, that is the quality of Donald Trump's supporters. If this were a mob boss being prosecuted, it would be obvious that there would need to be some sort of gag order to protect the witnesses. Do you think it will be that obvious to the judge that we need one here?
Well, Joy, I do think that it will be pretty obvious for Judge Chutkan to understand the severity of what she's dealing with. To pick up where Lisa left off, I think that this is an interesting collision between Donald Trump, the candidate who we've been talking about, and Donald Trump, the defendant. And the reason I say that is the court cites, well, rather, the prosecution cites to a 1966 Supreme Court case called Shepard versus Maxwell. And in that case, basically what it did was it allowed the Supreme Court to take measures in order to protect the fair and impartial trial of any defendant. In this case, however, the interesting thing about it that differs from that case is that the notion of a circus-like atmosphere is being created by the defendant himself. And so the reason why I say with Donald Trump, the candidate, this is an interesting collision of worlds is because what I anticipate his attorneys are going to argue in their reply brief is that because he is a presidential candidate, it infringes upon his First Amendment rights to actively campaign and use social media to campaign. But the genius and the brilliance in Jack Smith's request is that he narrowly tailors, as Lisa already talked about, the request to basically include court personnel or other individuals who are not necessarily going to be opposing political parties. The only person who I can think of who might be at risk would be Mike Pence. But other than that, there's no argument to be made that his First Amendment rights as a candidate will somehow be infringed upon by Judge Chutkan granting this order. So I think it was a great job done by the DOJ and Jack Smith, and I anticipate that some version of their request is going to be granted by the court because she does understand this is someone who has a very wide platform, and his acolytes, his followers, his disciples, they are prone to action. And when we see them act, we know what happens.
Yeah, and let me play one more. This is Ruby Freeman testifying. Well, I'll just read it. When the great state of Georgia did what the great state of Georgia did with Ruby Freeman mess. Why not just tell the truth? Get rid of the turmoil and guilt and take our country back from the evils and treachery and the radical left monsters who want to see America die, blah, blah, blah. And that resulted in Ruby Freeman getting insane death threats, Harry, as well as her daughter getting them. She had to move out of her home. So we know what Trump is capable of. Can he assert that he has a right on the campaign trail to attack Ruby Freeman, to attack Judge Chutkan, to attack Jack Smith? Because the latter two are a part of his campaign stump speech so far.
They are, and this is exactly his MO. So I just want to say that, first of all, it's absolutely legitimate what Smith is saying, and the narrow, the tailored order is designed specifically to keep him from intimidating witnesses and prejudicing the jury pool. On the other hand, we're really going to the heart of his MO, and I think Lisa read the most important part of the order. It's really not so narrow when you think about Trump's desires and technique. And the sort of compelling part of the motion, when you see it all together, we've kind of gotten inured to Trump's daily tirades, but you see it all, and there's an overwhelming sense, not simply that he's letting off steam, but he's really trying to get at witnesses, get at the jury system, get at the judges and court personnel. And so that's what this gag order, and I agree with Charles, some version of it will probably be entered, will in fact handcuff him about. They'll say, oh, of course you can still do everything else and protect your First Amendment rights. But I think it is designed to hamstring him specifically in some of the things he most wants to do on the campaign trail, and he'll be in, the something of a straitjacket if she imposes it. He should be, but of course that will make the next confrontation all the more likely.
How do you enforce it, former federal prosecutor Harry Litman? How do you even enforce it? They gonna put him in jail?
In the clink. That is what underlies all of this, and we've been talking about this since the start. She doesn't want to do it, but she's now come to one more really strict, if she enters this, command. And at the end of the day, her power is this pretty severe ability to control her courtroom and the case by putting him in jail. I think there'd be maybe another warning, but that's the thing. She is really, he's really bringing her, he's burning a fair bit of the rope between him and going into the jail for a short time anyway.
Charles, you and I've talked about this before. I mean, trying to get witnesses in a mob case is hard enough. Trying to get witnesses in a case against Donald Trump, who uses his Truth Social to individually target people. People, you read in the filing, people have had their home addresses posted, pictures of their home posted, names of their children posted, and then Donald Trump's, hate troops attacking those people and threatening those people. They threaten federal law enforcement. They're not afraid to threaten FBI agents. That's where it's gotten. And so his people are dangerous, and he knows it, and he uses them against individual people. Is there a concern here that it's going to get hard for witnesses to take the chance if they can't afford to get 24/7 security for themselves?
Well, Joy, I can tell you as a former prosecutor, that's always a concern when you have a defendant who is willing to go out and basically spew vitriol and hatred around the proceedings, around the people who are responsible for conducting the proceedings, and also around any of the witnesses. You put a direct target on their back. I think that Judge Chuckton's order is likely going to include some allusion to talking about how the world that we live in is different now, and you can actually be doxxed. You're talking about Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, both of whom are actually named as part of in the indictment people who they tried to intimidate based off of the defendant's efforts here. And so that's all going to play a factor in how the decision is made. But I also want to talk about the importance of not tainting a jury. In the world that we live in that is wrought with misinformation, it is very important that there is some limit placed on Donald Trump around how he discusses what's going on at this trial, because that misinformation, as we have already seen on so many different occasions, fuels that mob. It fuels his angry followers and makes them believe that something is going on when it really isn't. Not only does that erode the trust in our fundamental democracy and our democratic institutions, but it taints the jury pool in such a way where they have preconceived notions about the notion of fairness before they even are sworn in for this trial.